quarter 2021 police report with Chief Zarro. So let the chief in, please.
Good afternoon, Mayor Anderson and council members, or good evening, I guess. Could get the share screen. Here we are. Working. I'm going to start with the quarterly report, if that is okay with you, and work from there into the year-end report. Okay, and just to confirm, Mayor Anderson, are you seeing the beginning slide? Perfect.
Chief, this is Brianna. Can you swap your display settings?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Like that?
Yep, perfect.
All right, so here we are with our first quarter report. We're able to get it done a little early this quarter, just to try and get it in with the year-end report. As I go through, you'll see a lot of positive news. The call volume, or the calls for service and the arrests are all down from the fourth quarter. Not by much if you look at the calls for service, but and then I'll slow down here in a minute, but we also have the reminder, the map of our police districts, starting from the bottom and working our way up 1 through 6. And this is a slide I haven't shown in a while, but this is partly for Councilmember Bell's benefit. I was showing these for a while, but it began to be the same thing over and over again, so I removed it. But one of the things that this shows, well, the orange blocks are, and this is by district, the orange blocks are self-initiated calls for service, and the yellow blocks are dispatched calls for service. And this is just by volume and the types of calls. And what I think is interesting and worth noting, and the reason I share it, particularly on the dispatch calls, or the yellow blocks listed on the slide, you can see that welfare checks and unwanted persons in almost every district are predominantly what our officers are responding to. And a welfare check can be anything from, I haven't heard from my employee in a while, can you please go check, to a caseworker saying that they want to go check on, or they want us to go check on a client that's not responding, or a neighbor that hears yelling coming from an apartment. So it encompasses quite a bit, but that's one of the big ones that our officers respond to, or the call types anyways. Then unwanted person, it's just what it sounds like. It's, my brother's visiting and he won't leave, or, there's somebody, a homeless person sleeping on in front of my business and won't move, or it's just somebody that's unwanted for one reason or another, and ends up, resulting in a call for service. And then finally, you'll see domestic violence in some of the boxes. That is more predominant in the more residential districts that we cover. So districts 3 and 4, where you don't see domestic violence, are more of our business districts. So residential areas where obviously you would expect more domestic violence calls, that's where we see those. But I just wanted to share that those are, as far as the types of calls that our officers go to, a lot of times it's not a specific or reference to a specific crime. It's very general, and the officers kind of have to figure it out when they get there. And then crime rates by district, as you can see, are districts 5 and 6 are predominantly residential, and those are where we see the least amount of crime per capita. But most of it is that we do see is in our business districts, 3 and 4, and then some in District 2. And our crime rates, and you'll hear me say this repeatedly, our crime rates are driven by property crimes. Our total crime rate is driven by our property crime rate. And that's what we see in our business districts, whether it's vehicle theft or shoplifting or just general theft. That's where we usually see most of those. And then some pretty good news, particularly on the property crimes front, which we've been struggling with for a while. We saw a reduction of a little over 5% or almost 6%, I guess, from the fourth quarter into the first quarter. Some of that I do attribute to a little more flexibility in some of our bookings at the jails that were having COVID restrictions. We have seen, we have been able to work with the different jails to get people booked in when we've caught them. And I do think that makes a difference. And also, it's also working with prosecutors to charge. So I think that's made a difference, and that's where we see some of the reduction there. And I'll talk a little bit more about persons crimes on one of our last slides. Persons crimes are up a little bit. If you notice in the previous slide, it's almost all, well, it is. It's simple assault or misdemeanor assault, which means it's typically not a weapon involved. And I've said before that, we've actually pulled the numbers, and it's about 75% of all persons crimes, and that's assaults, the victim and the suspect know each other. So that it's not that there's an increase in strangers attacking people they don't know. It's people that, and largely domestic violence, but people that know each other, that for one reason or another get into some sort of conflict and it results in an assault. And then I don't remember if this was included last time. I don't think it was, but I do believe somebody asked about it. And this is the persons crimes at Western State Hospital. They're not going to have typically property crimes there because that's not the environment for it. But persons crimes, and those would typically be assaults, are what we would see there. And we, you can go back to, the second quarter of 19 and see that they were pretty high. And even before that, the years that aren't included in this chart, we saw some pretty high numbers. And if you'll remember, they accounted for actually a significant percent of all of our persons crimes citywide. I think it's impressive to show that, they put some measures in place that have reduced their persons crimes to, record level lows when we're talking about 2.25. And then property crimes. This reflects some of the good news I talked about, going from 1136 in the fourth quarter to 1029 in the first. It's a good looking drop on the graph there that, like I said, I think is attributed partly to the flexibility of jails and allowing us to book people in when we catch them. Now, society crimes are interesting, and there's, you go back to the second quarter of 20 and see that big dip. And that is largely because property crimes are investigations of, society crimes like drug possession are proactive investigations. And in the second quarter of 20, there was so much activity that was shut down because of we were at the onset of COVID that we just weren't having those proactive investigations. So that was reflected in that dip there. Then they got back up as the year moved on, got back up to our pretty much a standard level, and then in the first quarter dropped significantly again. And I think comfortably attribute at least a portion of that to the Blake decision, where even if we do catch somebody with some drugs on them, it's not an arrest for the drugs; it's whatever other charge they had pending. But it's I think reflected in the numbers there and why we have such a sharp drop off. Just it's been made not illegal, essentially. And then here's our total crime number. And as I've said, property crimes drives our total crime. And this is definitely reflects that. And we can see, I actually had, our crime analyst, Doug Strand, verify this number, because this is going to be one of the lowest in years for a quarter. And it's really significant, I think. And we're, continuing to move in a good direction. And then quarter by, comparing quarters, as I've said before, that each quarter kind of has its own personality or characteristics. And so there is some benefit to comparing just, in this case, first quarters. And we're seeing, at least the lowest first quarter since 2016. And then total accidents, unchanged from the fourth quarter. The weather's been about the same. We've probably had about the same amount of people on the road. So no significant, no change at all going from fourth quarter to first quarter. But if we notice the trend going back to 2018, the second quarter in 18, definitely a good trend line there. And I would say that in general is related to a lot of the road improvements that the city's done in the past few years to just make the roadways safer. And I think it's reflected in the number of collisions. And I want to throw this in again, motor vehicle theft for the first quarter. We're still, we had a bit of a dip in the fourth quarter, which was nice to see. The first quarter, we did see another increase, and it's, that while total property crimes are down, we're still struggling with vehicle theft. And I'll talk a little bit more about it in one of our later slides, but it's just tough to get a handle on. Those are some very prolific folks. And those, while we might be able to get an exemption for booking on somebody that breaks into a house, somebody that steals a car, unless it's somebody that, has stolen multiple cars, and we've worked with the prosecutor on them, it's going to be tough to get them booked. And when thieves are out, they're stealing. That's kind of what they do. So I'm covering some of the notable incidents, two very significant ones on January 7th, early in the year. We had the first, and knock on wood, the only homicide we've had this year, a 17-year-old boy in an argument with his father. Sometime after the argument, walks up behind his father and shoots him in the back of the head. Called 911 and portrayed it as a suicide, but officers that responded kind of recognized some things that didn't add up, and detectives were called, and they were able to, figure out that it was actually a homicide and that the son had shot his father. Also on that same day, within hours, officers responded to a 6-week-old child, a baby with what ended up being 21 broken bones. The biological father ended up being identified as a suspect, and probable cause was developed for his arrest, and he's currently in jail awaiting trial. And you think about those two calls within hours of each other. And some of the same officers that went to those calls also went to burglaries and went to unwanted persons and some of the more, quote unquote, routine stuff that our officers go to. And I've said, on many occasions that one of the tough asks of our officers is to have the same, a mental approach and the same professionalism when you're dealing with a 21-week-old baby with broken bones, and then going straight from that to, a shoplift or something more mundane. That takes a lot, and it takes a toll on people. And it's impressive that our officers are able to handle all of that in, a very short amount of time. Another incident that we saw that really, I bring this up, it wasn't a Lakewood incident per se, but it was on the freeway in Lakewood, and it was a state patrol investigation. And this is one where suspect is riding in the car with his sister-in-law, finds a pistol in the glove box, and these are adults, and starts playing with it and shoots himself in the hand, and it goes through his hand and into her leg, and she's the one driving. They obviously stopped the car abruptly in the middle of the freeway, and this is during rush hour. Gets out, and there's a confrontation with the trooper before the trooper is able to get him into custody. And that's, our officers are told that there's, a possible shooting on the freeway and the trooper's struggling with somebody. You can imagine the response that got. And then traffic on I-5 was, if anybody was in that, they were in it for several hours that day. But definitely a chaotic incident that was handled very well by everybody involved. I think moving on, there's the street racing events that we had in Pierce County this first quarter. Some of it, was brought to light after the incident in Tacoma, where one officer ran over a bystander, a spectator at one of these during their response. And that brought more attention and obviously, and more street racers to our area. Lakewood participated in a coordinated response of essentially just trying to deter them by having a visible presence around the county. And by and large, I think that was an effective approach. And we do still see them coming into Pierce County and coming into Lakewood, but not nearly as often. And we plan on taking the same approach just to have that deterrent effect. And I'd mentioned property crimes, seeing that uptick from the fourth quarter. And this is, again, the lowest quarter, even though this is, a slight uptick. It's the second lowest violent crime number since the first quarter of 2011. So we are still, while we never want to see an increase, we're still very low in perspective. And again, it's driven by the simple assaults. The aggravated assaults were very low by comparison, just 55 to 225. Property crime numbers were down. If you drive a Honda Accord or a Ford pickup of a certain year, you're a likely target of vehicle thefts, and it's just based on how the cars are made. Typically, they're ignitions and are easy to pry off and start the cars. And then vehicles left idling by their owners. That's huge. Every year we see it, and cars are left idling just to warm up. And that's essentially a crime of opportunity for some of these folks that are out there. So overall, total crime is lower for the second quarter and driven by our property crime numbers. So that is a blast through our first quarter. I'd be happy to answer any questions before moving on to the year-end report.
Mr. Brandstetter.
Hey, Mr. Mayor. Chief, thank you for the report. Had a couple of things I wanted to clarify. With respect to bookings, do you anticipate that if Pierce County moves from phase 3 to phase 2 in terms of COVID restrictions, that the jail will tighten up on bookings again?
I don't see that. I think the decisions about bookings into the jail are made independent of the phase that we're in. I don't think the phases dictate bookings.
Okay. And on your slide about the most frequent calls officers respond to in the districts and in residential districts, one that was pretty common on multiple districts was 911 hangups. What do officers usually find when they're responding to that, and what really is the guidance about how they do that?
Well, it's it used to be that a 911 hangup was typically a domestic or a fight or something like that. Now that's, I think, more commonly what we see is it's a misdial on a cell phone, or an inadvertent dial on a cell phone that either gets canceled before officers get there, or officers don't get dispatched at all because there's no exact location. But when there is, or it can be a child playing with the phone, we do still see those. But if it is an actual call, it's usually some sort of fight, whether it's a domestic or something similar.
Okay. All right, and the young child that was injured on January 7th, how are they doing?
Yeah, the child is survived, obviously, and recovering from his injuries. And I hate to say the good thing, but the I guess the positive about it, the child being that young, is they mend quickly, and they're very resilient. So the child will, I'm sure, recover completely from all the injuries.
All right, thank you, Chief.
Mr. Whalen.
Thank you, Chief. You're going to go to the year-end report after this, so maybe my questions are more germane to that. But I wanted to ask you about your comment about property crime within the Central Business District. And I think your comment there was the reflection that, if anything, we've seen an uptick in the CBD. Is that right? What do you attribute that to?
Well, it's right now it's the vehicle thefts. Going from the fourth quarter to the first quarter, what we saw was a decrease in just general theft, which in the business district would be shoplifting more commonly than anything else. But vehicle thefts are the ones that we're seeing still in the business districts.
Okay. How about vandalism? General vandalism against businesses or businesses?
That was another one that was down significantly. Burglary, larceny or theft, excluding vehicles, and vandalism were all down, going from fourth quarter to first quarter.
Okay. Well, my comment is, I think you guys are doing good work, and the statistics certainly reflect that. If I get a call from a constituent, it's usually about something to a business in the Central Business District. And I wanted to reflect, I got an email from someone this last week that their daughter goes to the Lakewood Dojo on Custer Road. They recently had their window smashed by a homeless guy. They had people who knew him, called and identified him, knew him personally, said he was unstable. They reported it to the police, and the quote unquote police have done nothing, which of course we all hear that complaint, right? But they actually say they can do nothing. They've had other businesses reach out to them, frustrated that their businesses are being targeted by homeless people, and quote unquote nothing's being done. And it's a perception. We all understand that there's a lot of perception when it's close to home. But perceptions can become reality. And so, I was involved with the Lakewood Dental Building yet again on 59th. They had their windows smashed in just a couple of weeks ago. And these property crimes in the Central Business District are putting a black eye on the city. And so it's not something that we can solve in a vacuum, but here's a thought. We have great success with dedicated teams like the embedded mental health team in Lakewood that's done good work. I think the downtown Tacoma Partnership, formerly known as a business improvement area, is an example of something that works, where teams are together. Again, it's funded differently than the Tacoma Police Department, but they have a dedicated officer or two, private security, that goes door to door to businesses and meets with them and is available to them. And if there's an issue with a business, they know who to call. And it's a dedicated team that responds, whether it's for security, cleanliness, those kinds of things. And totally not your bailiwick yet, I know that. But one wonders whether or not we might make better progress with our business owners if we had a dedicated team for them to contact that would be available for them and would be coordinated a little bit with economic development through Becky Newton, maybe the chamber through Linda Smith or one of her staff members, and maybe a dedicated Lakewood Police Department team with code enforcement or an officer to that district that really knows and meets the business owners and can be more effective in responding to their needs and concerns. I think we'd make a lot of hay. if we did that initiative in the next, 6 months to a year. Because right now they feel like they call the non-emergency 911, maybe they get somebody, maybe they don't. Maybe they treat it as a nuisance, maybe they treat it more seriously than that. But I think it's the impression that we make with them that's going to generate dividends. And that would be my hope for the future on that.
I think there's certainly merit to that. And that was, I guess, the intent behind the neighborhood policing program and the neighborhood police officers we have assigned to CSRT. It sounds like could be doing a better job of connecting with our businesses and being that person to contact.
I think so, because otherwise it's just somebody at the other end of a non-emergency 911 call, and maybe
Right.
someone responds, maybe they don't. I think we need to relook at how we do community policing for the small business owners in the district and do a better job of connecting with them and making sure they know who is available to reach if they have a need, and maybe learning who they are through kind of a nice handshake introduction with Becky Newton or Linda Smith and her team at the chamber. I think we can do a lot together.
Okay.
Mr. Volkey.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hey, Chief, I want to ask about assaults, aggravated assault, simple assault, and I'm glad to see that Western State really has improved, and I think mainly just for the employees' safety. And it's nice to not have it count in our stats, but that also is an indication it's a safer place, and hopefully the employees are getting along better there. But I do want to ask about assaults in general, both aggravated and simple. Are you seeing that kind of all over the place, or is it a function of a lot of domestic violence that's not being reported right now? Or is it also a function that a lot of restaurants are barely open or closed and we don't have fights at the end of the evening in the bars?
So you're not referencing the increase we saw, you're just the historical decrease. It's kind of because we did.
I'm looking at like the decrease we had year over year in both aggravated assault and simple assaults.
Yeah. I some of that is just the change of environment. And I will say that, not having a nightlife might be boring for some people, but boring is good when it comes to public safety. And, we don't have bars to have big bar fights at, and things like that. So that does make a difference.
Okay, thank you.
Right, the annual report.
All right. All right. So here we are with the annual report. Here we are in April doing the 2020 annual report, but I might have procrastinated a little bit in getting this done. But I think this front page says a lot. Just the photo of everybody wearing masks and a group coming to the station with from Rotary saying thank you for what our officers are doing. It was the year of the mask, and COVID was one of the big things that impacted us. And for as much as we saw in protests and demonstrations and very vocal criticism of the police, we also still had a lot of people that came out and supported us. So, and that's what's reflected here. And just to make sure, Mayor Anderson, I've got something weird going on with my computer. Are you seeing the front page with the picture from Rotary? Okay, thank you. So a couple of things that I touched on here were the big adversities that we faced in 2020. These are definitely in our rearview mirror. The only one of them that is the wildfires. And we did have our own, wildfires here in Western Washington and even in our area that impacted us. We had some right around Lakewood, right along the freeway, and the Sumner Grade fire was significant in our county. And we had officers go out to include our drone team, our UAS team, and help take aerial footage of that to help with the firefighting effort. And if you all remember just how bad the air quality was then, and it was the year of COVID. It was a pandemic was something that we talked about, and occasionally in planning for disasters and emergency management planning, but you never really know how it's going to go until you're actually hit with it. And we're still obviously still dealing with it. I think we dealt with it as best as we could, and I think a large part of that is due to the efforts of our Assistant Chief John Unfred and our emergency management team, just to be somewhat prepared for a major disaster like that. But it was new to all of us, and our department wasn't untouched. We had several members, including myself, that contracted COVID at different times of the year, later in the year, but at different times, and it was rough going, but definitely something we're learning from and still fighting through. And you can't talk about 2020 either without mentioning George Floyd and his killing in Minnesota in May. To compound that, here in Lakewood, we had our own officer-involved shooting in early May, and the civil unrest that stemmed from that was not localized to Minnesota; it was nationwide. We saw it in Seattle and in Portland, certainly, and in Pierce County. One of the things I am proud of is the way that our community responded. Even those that were vocal in their criticism of the police department and wanted to demonstrate, did so peacefully, but were still heard and still made sure that their message got out. So I'm definitely proud of the way our department and community worked through that. And I threw in that last line about having 2020 behind us, but looking forward to 2021, and there will be other challenges. I'm always leery about saying if we just get through this, we'll be in the clear, because something else always pops up. So we just need to be prepared and ready for whatever is thrown at us. A good snapshot here is of our org chart, particularly for our newer council members, of just the department structure. And then we get into some of the policing by the numbers, and we see that this is before I've shown this trend line going from 1996 when the city incorporated, but I think as a department we've been around long enough that we can start using that as our benchmark instead of 25 years ago, and it makes for a neater graph as well. And some of these I've talked about, the property crimes and persons crimes, and what is really what really impacts our total crime rate. Our calls for service, interestingly enough, went up a little bit. But our self-initiated traffic stops went down, which means more people were calling 911 for different reasons. But with the crime rate going down and some of our crimes going down and the arrests, you can see going down, that means there was a lot of people calling for maybe non-criminal reasons or nuisance type reasons, or just general safety concerns or security concerns. And here we are with our property crimes. You could see that, month by month, and in August, they started to go up and sort of held that way until the end of the year. And then persons crimes, again, we're seeing, record low persons crimes. And it's it's nice after, knowing what Lakewood's been for the last, 30 years, 25, 30 years. It's nice to see that we're setting records for how low our persons crimes are. Then again, society crimes, I talked about that, and you can see the for 2020, the dip starting in March when some of the restrictions were put on, and a lot of the proactive policing activities were restricted, and then it climbed back up as we kind of moved through the pandemic. And then total accidents too. That's a very telling graph. If you just look at when the accidents declined, and that was in April when, the restrictions were put in place, and everybody was either working from home or not working. And then it slowly started to climb back up. And in September, when everybody was on the road again and learning how to drive again, we saw a spike in collisions, but that quickly dropped back down. So the Pierce County Force Investigation Team, this was, you've heard me mention this quite a bit. I thought it was definitely worth mentioning in our year-end report. I certainly spent a lot of time working on the development of the team on behalf of the Pierce County Police Chiefs Association, and our own Lieutenant Westby was a key player in all of that as well. He's one of the first commanders that stepped up to be a commander for the actual team and help develop protocols and plug into this through the state and the Criminal Justice Training Commission to make sure that we were doing things right. We're to a point now where we are probably 99% there. We have some training that our lead investigators need to go to just to meet the requirements of the WAC, but we've made a tremendous amount of progress. And I can say too that, talking to our commanders, there's, our own Chris Westby and the others from other agencies who communicate with different teams around the state. And believe it or not, we are miles ahead of where a lot of the other agencies are around the state. So something definitely to be proud of. Just a lot of work went into it, and we've managed to accomplish quite a bit in a little over a year that we spent working on it. So even with COVID and the shutdown, we were able to still do a lot of our good community work. The Citizens Academy was, we were still able to hold our second Citizens Academy. We had to make special arrangements for spacing and made sure everyone wore masks, and we're diligent about that. But that was the second year doing it. And again, we had a lot of positive feedback, and we are planning on doing it again this year. And the Lakewood Officers Charity also continued their efforts with the Shop with an Officer program and the holiday meals, as it says, nicknamed Moody Meals, because Ryan Moody is the one that developed it and brought it to the department when we hired him. A lot of great work that goes kind of unnoticed, and we try to highlight it when we can. But the amount of families that the Lakewood Officers Charity connects with and helps is pretty outstanding. Getting to some of the numbers, we're safe to use the D word now, drone. For a while, we were sticking to UAS because we were worried about the negative connotations that drone had, but we think it's become so commonplace that we're safe. And you can see a lot of good work done with the drone. And I'd mentioned earlier the efforts with the fires out in Sumner, and they were actually able to show with some of the heat sensitive cameras that they have where the hot edge was for the fire, and really helped the firefighting effort in determining where to dedicate resources. And our property room, while it's just a property room and just a warehouse, as you can see, takes in almost 5,000 pieces of evidence a year. And that's, managing not just what they take in, but what they already had and what they had to get rid of. And it's something that if you don't stay on top of, you really end up underwater and having to, lease other space or figure out something to do with all the evidence that you bring in. And a couple of our specialty units, canine captures, we had 19 of those with our 2 canine teams. And then our behavioral health contact team, you can see we're very busy again with 429 separate episodes of care, which is how they define their contacts with folks, and really having a huge impact on the amount of people in need that they work with and they connect with. And as you know, with your 2021-2022 budget, allocated funds for a second MHP that will be starting in July to help not only the police department, but also the rental housing safety program and some of the people in need that they come across. All of our units were busy, even with COVID and with some of the shutdown. The lakes were definitely busy. If you'll remember, back in the summer, our Marine Services unit were on really hustling out there. For our criminal investigations, you can kind of get a snapshot here of the amount of cases that came in and the amount of cases cleared. And, you know, some of those that you'll see, like for major crimes, for instance, 153 cases assigned and 77 cleared. That's not necessarily 77 of those 153, because the cases don't recognize the calendar year. You know, you can get one in December that doesn't get cleared until sometime the next year. So a lot of cases coming in, and that's, you know, when we talk about investigators and people, you know, there's you know, people that think they have a good understanding of what it takes to investigate a case. That might be the case, but you have to do that while other cases are still piling up behind you and on your desk. And then professional standards is the section that handles our hiring, background, and training. And hiring was certainly stunted this last year, as was training. So they were able to focus on other things, but that is typically where their focus is. And they also, professional standards is where we keep track of all of our use of force numbers. And this slide shows that we had 114 incidents involving a use of force. That over half of which involved something just soft, empty hands, which is either an arm bar or just 2 officers having to take somebody by the arm on either side and you know, handcuff them. It didn't require, you know, so much as a punch or any other kind of tool, which, you know, that's the majority of what our officers do when we talk about using force. It's just soft, empty hand techniques that are very low likelihood of injury or anything like that resulting. And while it might look like too that we've seen an increase, there was a couple of years ago, about 2017 and 18, when we started encouraging over-reporting rather than under-reporting. We also changed our policy that required reporting when what we added was anytime more than one person is needed to physically subdue somebody to get them into custody. What we tried to capture is what any average citizen watching would consider a use of force. And a combination of encouraging the over-reporting and that change of policy, I think, led to the increase in documented uses of force. But we did see a decrease last year. Then our professional standards also covers our internal investigations, and we had 8 different investigations and with 12 allegations. And the reason you can have more allegations is one investigation or one incident that an officer is being investigated for could have several potential policy violations. And that's where the 12 allegations comes from. 5 of those were sustained. And down below, you'll see the definitions of the different dispositions, but not sustained is essentially there's no evidence one way or the other. And unfounded means the allegation the allegation was simply that, just unfounded. And then one was a standards failure. And what that meant was there wasn't necessarily a policy violation. However, the act that occurred or the outcome wasn't what we wanted or wasn't consistent with our values. So our policy or our standards were not in line with what they should have been. And officer-involved collisions, and we started tracking these, well, for as long as I can remember, they're a very high liability thing for the city. So you wanted not just for liability's sake, but for injuries to the officers and citizens, keep a close eye on those. And what we saw was 24 total collisions last year, but only 2 of them occurred actually on the roadway with other moving vehicles. The majority of them, or 2 of those where the officer was at fault. The others were in parking lots where they're backing and hitting an inanimate object, a light post or a parked car or something like that. So those we don't like to see, but we can definitely live with those versus the collisions that occur on the traveled roadway where, it's with other vehicles. And just for a little perspective, we looked at the, every time an officer gasses up, they type in the number of miles into the gas pump. And using that system, we were able to get a total of roughly 2 million miles per year total combined that our officers drove in 2020. And of those 2 million miles, only 24 collisions, I think, is a pretty good ratio. And only a small portion of those were preventable. And then pursuits of the 41, we want to show what the reasons for the pursuits were. And a lot of times what we're seeing is either a felony property crime or a recklessly driven vehicle. And when you think about it, the only difference between a pursuit and a recklessly driven vehicle is the reckless vehicle has a police car behind them with their lights and siren going. We have been better about terminating. There was years ago where we wouldn't see any terminations in a year. We're seeing more of those now. We saw 17 this year, and that was either officers terminating themselves or supervisors terminating them, and that is huge progress from where we were years ago. And then retirements and hirings, and we did see one officer hired at the bottom there, Brian Tapasna, who's currently struggling through a COVID academy. It's been tough, but he's been a trooper and plugging away through it. Then we saw 2 retirements, CSO Gail Connolly, who's been here since we started the department, and Sergeant Tom Stewart, who was here since we started the department. And Tom, boy, he had a rough ending here. He had COVID in December, was actually, of everybody on the department that got it, he had the worst of it, was actually hospitalized, got out of the hospital a week before his retirement, and showed up at his retirement with an oxygen tank, and is now doing fine. But really, you worry about people getting to the end of their career healthy, and he made it just under the wire. I mean, he was in the hospital literally over Christmas and up until a week before he retired. And I just should point out too, we offered to extend his retirement until he was sure he was in the clear, and he insisted on keeping it the date that he designated. So he is now doing well and enjoying his retirement. So, and there we have the year 2020 in a very brief nutshell. A lot of adversities that our department dealt with, but we, as we always seem to do, we take them head on and we deal with them the best we can. And thanks to the men and women on the department and the support from you all, we get through. So be happy to answer any questions.
Questions for the chief? Mr. Whalen.
Well, thank you. Again, Chief, thank you for the report. It's great to see the crime stats coming down. Among other stats coming down, I'd love to see the collision numbers come down, over time as well, because I know that impacts our rating potentially with the insurer, but good work overall. A couple of questions, with the the elevated concerns over community policing with regard to communities of color. And you mentioned the George Floyd and our own Saeed Joe Quinn issue. With the legislature poised to pass, or I think they've already passed some laws restricting certain police techniques and tactics, what's been the outcome from our department in terms of lessons learned from not only the national spotlight, but our own internal spotlight?
Well, nothing in the legislature really is passed yet. I think we have a good idea of what's coming, and
Right.
A lot of decisions that are being made are being made on emotion and kind of some false assumptions about what police do, which is a little bit frustrating. But there's we are in a constant state of evaluation of how we do things, and some of the lessons learned nationally. Like if we look at just at the George Floyd incident, we don't, I remember years ago hearing from, training officers saying, well, if you're talking to tell me you can't breathe, that means you're breathing. Well, that's clearly not the case. And that's, we've since grown as a profession, or should have, to where we know that's not the case. And if somebody tells you they can't breathe, then you take efforts to put them in a position where they can. And certainly get medical aid there as quickly as you can. Being mindful of, us as being not just the police first responders, but we oftentimes get there quicker than medical aid. So it is incumbent upon us to have some understanding of treatment of trauma and people having, suffering some, different kinds of medical crises or mental crises as well. And what we've done internally is, and we started this a couple of years ago, but it's kind of reinforced after what we saw last year. We train officers in what's called law enforcement casualty care. Now is the term for it, and our officers are issued tourniquets, they're issued chest seals, and I think I've shared with you all before the praise that they've gotten from doctors and medical professionals for the work they've done before the fire department ever even got there. The training that we go through for crisis intervention, it's just some of the medical training we go through that allows us to recognize and treat or at least stabilize different injuries and crises before the real professionals get there.
Right.
That's allowed us to, those are some of the changes we've made to help us grow as a profession, not just as a department. And then we look at some of the, how we respond to protests. And I think, we started taking that sort of hands-off approach years ago. And I think that's still proven to be the right approach.
And much of this deals with, like I mentioned, on the business side of it, public perception eclipsing reality sometimes, with regard to, the public's and community's perception of how well we do our job. I think reports like this are really helpful to communicate, because it does show that community policing works in Lakewood. You have decreased crime in many sectors by any measurement. But there still are issues that we have to address. And one of them is how do we deal with those members of the community that don't feel that they're adequately represented. And so with regard to hiring, can you educate us a little bit on how well we're doing attracting diversity of candidates by way of race and gender and otherwise, and how that's working with regard to 94 commissioned officers now, or 98? What do we have?
95, I believe. Well, looking at different blocks of time, I know that the Civil Service Commission takes a close look at this frequently, and our HR department put something out recently too. And I want to say it's 25% of our department now is either female or people of color, and I think that number goes up when you look at our hiring in the past few years.
Okay.
And we are attracting good candidates. We're attracting good lateral candidates, some of whom happen to be women and people of color. Recruiting is always something that's tough, especially in this environment, but I think we're doing something right. And when we look at who we've been able to hire.
And then on the PC Fit team, and I think that this is what, the second full year or first full year that that's been in place?
We haven't had a full year since it's been in place.
This is the independent investigation, and the SAID, Joe Quinn was the first one of our incidents that was independently investigated by another agency, right?
Correct. That was not PC Fit, but yes, that was investigated by the crime response unit, who we were a part of and used to be who we would work with to investigate these incidents.
Got it. And what is correct me if I don't remember this correctly, but when we were chatting about either PC Fit or the independent investigation statute last year, there was a community member component to that. How does that member fitting into what we currently do with either PC Fit or the independent investigation statute?
Right. So the statute requires that two community non-law enforcement members, the term in the WAC is non-law enforcement representative. So a community member, that there are two community members that are essentially identified and assigned to each investigation,
Right.
And their specific roles are identified in the WAC. Now, when our shooting happened last May, we had not identified our community members yet. So we were a few weeks in before Larry Woods volunteered to be our first community member. And then we actually had, a couple months later, we had the process to identify our two. We ended up with three, but one moved out of Lakewood shortly after being selected. So we ended up with the two that we needed in Julius Brown and Larry Woods. And they are still plugged in. Julius or Larry is, as you all know, very involved in a lot in Lakewood, but very involved with PC Fit and was very involved with our investigation that was conducted by Crew. Julius was involved in the interviews to interview investigators that were assigned to the team. And that's one of the requirements by the WAC, is any investigators had to be interviewed. That the word interviewed is actually in the WAC. So it's not just selected. So we had a panel of 6 community representatives from around the county, because every jurisdiction had to select their community representative. So we had a group of all of those community representatives. We had a group of 6 that represented the whole, that participated and conducted the interviews that were all done online to identify the detectives or the investigators for the teams. And that's kind of where we're at now. And they're still involved. And we have a couple other interviews that are coming up that actually next week for some additional detectives and investigators that are being added to the team. So they're definitely still very much involved, and as are the other jurisdictions' community representatives.
Well, I think that's great. And it goes to my last comment, and I'll yield the floor. The Citizens Academy that you put on this last year, I heard great reviews about. And to the extent you can plug in a few more of those, like one every half year, quarter, however you can do it with your resources, and invite folks like Larry and Julius to be part of it, to communicate to members of the community how the process really works and how progress is being made in Lakewood, assuming I think it is. And I think the public needs to really feel that it is, members of the public, because I can tell you that more communication, as you well know, Chief, is always better. There's a member of an attendee on the call tonight that was with a group that came to visit me in my house to talk about concerns over community policing. And I think the more we can communicate and involve members of the community that are anxious or have questions or issues and tell them about process, engage them in the process, I think the better off we're all going to be. So I applaud your work and just encourage you to do more of it, because explanations to the small group here is fabulous. I wish I could clone you and take you out, 100-fold. And I think it would really be great. So thanks.
Yeah, there's a lot of people that will say one of me is too many, but that's all right.
My wife has told us that, but
Yeah. I will say that, you know, to your point about the community, the Citizens Academy, and sharing that our perspective with community members. I've talked with, the Lakewood African American Police Advisory Committee was, brought back this year, and that was at the initiative of the community members. And one of the things that they are working on, or the last I talked to them, they're working on, and one of the things that needs to complement our Citizens Academy is us listening to getting with them and listening to their perspective. It's one thing for us to present how we do things and share our perspective and I think that's very valid and useful. Yeah. But we have to do the same. We have to sit and listen to the perspectives of our community members, so we get where they're coming from as well. If it's just us presenting and if it's just us talking, if it's not a two-way street, then I don't think it achieves what we need to achieve.
So you're gonna tell us when we're gonna do a couple of those events, right? Soon?
Yeah, I'm working with
progress and not just communication about it.
No, I know. And we, we'll do another Citizens Academy this year. And, to your question about doing more per year, they're pretty time intensive, and they go on for months. I think it's like a 3-month, once a week for 3 months. That's a lot. So to do more of those in a year, I think would be a little more than
right.
we could handle. But I am, working with LAPAC, and I do hope to work with them to put on some of the perspective sessions and listening sessions.
That would be great. Yep. Fabulous. Thank you.
Ms. Moss.
Mayor, Chief, thank you for the report. I appreciate the good news that you're sharing with us. That's awesome. You did not talk about body cams.
Right.
And I was just curious to ask this question. I just want to ask this question. I read whereas if someone that is creating a problem requests not to be videoed, you have to turn the camera off. Is that true?
Well, it depends on where they're at. If they're in a public place, then no. If you're in a public place, you're in a public place. If it's in a private place, then yes, we would have to turn the camera off.
Do you make it mandatory that request is recorded?
Well, and keep in mind, we only have dash cams right now.
Right.
We have 2 body cams that our motorcycle officers wear, but it would start out being recorded. The first thing the officers say, even our 2 motorcycle officers with the body cams, the first thing they say is you're being audio and video recorded. So a request to not record anything would come after that. So it would be recorded.
Okay, thank you. I just thought that was be a loophole if they could say it and nobody would know they said it. So thank you.
Oh, right.
Ms. Farmer.
Thank you for the report, Chief. It's fun to have been here for a full year and actually have heard 2 reports now. And it's really great to see how it all shakes out and the good work that the department is doing. I have a couple of random questions. The behavioral health contact team, 429 separate episodes of care responses to, how does that compare over time?
That's a fantastic question. It's been pretty consistent. It's been in the multiple hundreds for a few years now. And keeping in mind, they were stood up in early 2015. So we've got 6 years now that they've been up and running. The first couple were probably just getting their feet under them. But for the past couple of years, I'd say we've been 300 to 400 a year easy.
Okay, thank you. And pages 16 and 17 have some really interesting statistics on the Marine Services Unit, Canine Unit. but they're just statistics from this year. Is there anything on those 2 pages that stand out to you either negatively or positively year over year?
No, not well. The canine captures, I think, is low. I think, one of the things that our canine handlers are going to consider is, what happens when we catch this person? Are we going to be able to book them into jail? And if that answer is no, then, they're going to, maybe not put out on them. Nothing about those numbers other than that really stand out. And the purpose of them is kind of to show, a sort of a volume in a given year. And it might be, useful to, especially as you're asking the questions, it might be useful to have, some sort of comparison for any number we give. So there is some frame of reference, but nothing in those really stood out. Just to show that, how active they are.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Branstetter.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. Yeah, thank you, Chief. The annual perspective is helpful, and I appreciate it. With respect to the behavioral health contact team, Officer Rocco is retiring or just about to. How are we progressing with selecting a new officer to do that, to work with what is now going to be 2 mental health professionals?
We have actually selected his replacement. It's Officer Jessica Fitzgerald, who is, she's been around a while, so some of you may have met her, but she is currently out on maternity leave, but will be back before July 1 or by July 1, I believe. And that's when, just after Ralph retires. So she will be stepping in, and I think will do an outstanding job with that. She's actually worked as an NPO in Ralph's unit, so she's seen the work that he does, and she has seen how our MHPs work. So she'll be able to, I think, transition in quite nicely.
Thanks, Chief. In 2020, that was a year of where there was a transition in the number and roles of CSOs. You mentioned Gail Connolly retired, but that it seems that CSOs were previously a significant mainstay in our relations with some of the residential neighborhoods. And particularly the neighborhood associations in districts 1, 2, and 4 have commented that they have noticed the void in terms of working to do that. That is not completely filled by there still being a neighborhood police officer and a patrol officer and that the code enforcement folks don't seem to fill the same communications role and dealing with some minor things that CSOs used to. Is there some adjustment to learning that as we've made that change?
There's, I think, an adjustment that can be made in the communication, and I think it kind of goes back to Councilmember Whalen's comment about the business district and just the communication between the NPOs and the neighborhood associations. I think more of that can be done. We are, as you know, adding another code enforcement officer starting in July. And I think having more communication with them as well can help, because they are the ones that handle some of the more nuisance type problems. So I think it's just improved communication and making more of an effort to connect with the neighborhood association residents.
Yeah, well, I do think going back to the deputy mayor's comments about the business district, but the CSOs tended to provide an avenue for people to communicate with without going through the 911 non-emergency number. That felt better anyway, even so taking a look at how to do more communication without relying on just telling people to use My Lakewood 311 or use the South Sound 911 non-emergency number is I think the void people are feeling. In your report, you mentioned under investigations, and you explained why there is a difference in the numbers between what reported as assigned and cleared. And it seems that maybe in a future report, you could give us sort of a running total about not just how many new cases were assigned in a year, but what really is the backlog of assigned but not yet cleared, or I don't know whether you have a not cleared but taken off the assigned list number of something to look at ahead. And on the chart on use of force, I was wondering why, when we were looking to use to compare 2020, why when we were looking at change, we were looking to use 2018 as the benchmark year. Was there something about 2019 that the data was not what we wanted to use in comparing our 2020 data when we were looking for percentage of change?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Was 2019 not in the slide?
The slide compared the change to 2018.
Well,
or maybe that's a mistake in the heading of the slide.
Maybe I'd have to go back and look. I apologize, but I know that, I mean, in the graph, it showed that the increase in reporting from 2018 to 19, and then a little bit of a deep.
So it's 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20, but then the last column said the percent change from 2018.
Oh, I apologize. That was just an oversight or an error that was probably left over from last year.
Oh, okay, I see. All right, anyway, and then the last thing on the PC Fit non-law enforcement representatives, when we appointed 3, we did that in some respect because we wanted to expand the diversity of the pool that we had, and then as has happened, we lost one due to relocation, but we don't have to go for a period of time without having the requisite 2. But would recruiting and appointing a 3rd so that we sort of protect ourselves against the same situation happening be a good idea?
Probably, yeah. It certainly wouldn't be a bad idea, because then you would have, we would have that redundancy in the position. So if somebody did leave for one reason or another, we wouldn't have to scramble at the last minute.
Okay, I guess we'll take that up with the city manager about how to do that. Thank you.
Okay.
Ms. Bell.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chief. Love the report. Love seeing that. I had a question. Are there other venues of communication that we use besides the Citizens Academy to have outreach to these communities and groups that want to be heard and have a conversation with the PD?
Well, it's our neighborhood associations. I try to make myself as accessible as possible, as well as, our our neighborhood policing program tries that. I've, through LAPAC is one, the group that just started up this last year. They're, coffee with the mayor, and it's not just through just the police department, but coffee with the mayor is one. And, just reaching out to different venues within the city, not just at the police department. But I would also, we had, not this last year, but coffee with a cop and cocoa with a cop, and just, creating events where people can just come and talk with us.
Yeah, no, I love the whole coffee with the chief or coffee cocoa with the cop, all those kinds of things. I just wondered if there was more of those to get the people that wanted to be heard and have the conversation, or if there was some times where you did outreach to the specific group and had a, like a one-on-one with them and some key members, from PD or city or things, just to really have a conversation and have people be heard. Because that sounded like that's what people do at the Citizens Academy, they learn, but also to kind of do more conversations.
Right. And some of it, I'll give an example. The one person that organized one of the marches, I've made a connection with her. She's actually from Tacoma Ceasefire, and I've talked with her a couple times. And for me, it's not about formal meetings. It's about being accessible and reaching out and making yourself accessible and talking with folks. And whether it's a phone call like that, or a conversation like that, or a neighborhood association meeting, or through LAPAC or LMCC, that's wherever I can, I try to do that. And it's also not just today. I mean, I've been in Lakewood for 20 some years. I was assistant chief starting in 2008. So a lot of the dialogue that I have has developed informally, just because of how long I've been around and trying to do that and trying to make myself accessible.
Yeah, maybe people would like to see what the dialogue is. What's the outcome from those meetings a little bit more? Maybe if that was put out there, I think then that could answer a lot of different questions.
Okay, that's fair enough.
Couple of totally unrelated questions, Chief. We had a good outcome with the SRT participating in a federal operation, but I noticed that the service of the warrant was in Tacoma. What are the guidelines and protocols for using the SRT outside of Lakewood, and what type of control is exerted over those folks when they're operating outside of Lakewood?
So we have, we are still in control of our team. In that case, they had like 12 to 15 different tactical teams that were, some were actually flown in by the FBI to help serve these warrants because there was so many of them that had to be done. So one, if they're going to ask for us to be able to participate, I'm going to need to be convinced that it's something that our team would normally do, and that we have control on the ground of our team, and that we are not deviating from what our normal protocols would be, and just operating in a safe manner. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but we don't suddenly give up all of our command and control over our team when we're participating in a regional effort like that.
Again, in that unrelated question, Councilmember Branstad earlier asked about the jail and jail capacity, which is the former sheriff described as a petri dish. So their concerns aren't what the governor's metrics are. Their concerns are trying to create an environment where the detainees aren't exposed to disease. that being said, you had, and the fact that we're going to have to probably live with some limited jail capacity for a while, is there any way, even if it costs us a little extra money, to use capacity at the Nisqually jail for selected individuals who don't meet the Pierce County jail's requirements for incarceration? If you know there's a prolific car thief, for example, that wouldn't be taken by Tacoma or some other similar repetitive property crime, but if you know from experience that getting that person off the street is going to have a positive impact, can we spend some money and put them in Nisqually?
We certainly can. And one of the things that we've done is evaluated, the crime that officers have them for is, it might be on the border of, there might be it might be kind of a misdemeanor, but almost a felony. But we know that the Pierce County Jail won't be able to take them for the felony, but Nisqually will for the misdemeanor. We'll opt for that. And a lot of times, they'll get more attention on the misdemeanor level because it's our local court that's handling it. So we are making those decisions in the field right now.
Thank you. Any other questions for the chief? Well, thanks for keeping and bringing us up to speed on this information, and we appreciate it. And we look forward to hearing about community outreach efforts over the next year. So we know they're going on, as we appreciate being kept up to speed on those things. Thanks.
All right, thank you all. And I think I've said this before, but your support goes a long way. Our officers do hear it. That's not unconditional. They know that as well, that they're expected to do things right and do things the right way. And but the support that you all voice at different times is definitely heard and appreciated. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. So we move on our agenda to a review of Region 5 All Hazard Mitigation Plan. We have Assistant Chief John Unfred for this with his emergency management hat on.
Good evening, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and Council. Sorry, I'll switch over. All right. This evening, I'm going to present our addendum to the Pierce County Region 5 Mitigation Plan. And I'll just kind of walk you through, give you a little bit of background on this. So the Hazard Mitigation Plan is a plan that is required by FEMA. It's one of our, we call it family of plans. So sort of the centerpiece of that is our Comprehensive Emergency Management Plan. That's the overall strategy, the CEMP. That has to be updated every 5 years. And the Hazard Mitigation Plan also has to be updated every 5 years. They're in off cycles, so we're not working on both of those at the same time. And then along with those, our emergency operations plan, that's what we use inside our emergency operations center. Our continuity of operations plan, which thankfully we completed our last update at really the beginning of 2020. So the ink wasn't really dry yet. And then we went into the first use of a COOP that I've seen during the pandemic. And we've been using it. Honestly, we've been operating under that in some fashion since then and still are today. The HIVA is our hazard identification and vulnerability assessment. And that's really the first step. So it kind of goes in a circular pattern, but you want to look at what hazards and our vulnerability is out there and then build your plans off of that. So we're constantly updating these plans. My screen. So as I mentioned, it's required under federal law that we have a local federal or a local mitigation plan. If we do not have a mitigation plan or a comprehensive emergency management plan, then we are not eligible for post-disaster grants. And so that would be a FEMA, public assistance after an earthquake or something of that magnitude. We were eligible for FEMA public assistance for COVID. However, the way they structured the eligibility of what expenses were eligible, we just didn't have enough to really make it worthwhile pursuing that avenue. And there were other streams of COVID support. But if there was something drastic like the volcano blows or earthquakes or even just a good strong windstorm, in order to be eligible, we have to have our mitigation plan up to date. So what is it? It's our commitment to reduce risk from natural hazards. So FEMA is tired of constantly paying out money after a disaster. They want to make sure, and that's why they put in that requirement that you have this plan, but they want to make sure that you're sort of addressing what is a hazard in your community to the extent that you can before it hits, because that's going to lessen the impact of the cost of the response. So the way we do this is sort of a partnership. Pierce County Department of Emergency Management, DEM, they write the overall plan for Homeland Security Region 5, which is all of Pierce County. And then all the cities within the region create an addendum that addresses their specific hazards and risks. So we're completely different from, say, Fiala in what risks and hazards that we have. And then, as I mentioned, it must be approved. I'll show you the review process here in a second, but it goes up through several layers of review, and then it has to be the last step, which is a resolution from the city council, which is what we're pushing forward tonight. So there's different sections of the plan, and the plan is about 200 pages long. So I know there's a link to it. I'm not going to go through it page by page and try to get the highlights. So section 1 covers the mitigation development process, how we develop this plan and the work that we put into it. Section 2 is really critical. That's the community profile. So our demographics, our infrastructure, our economic situation, our number of businesses, all of that, because you really need to know what is going to be impacted by a disaster. So in order to do that, you have to understand your community and have a profile of what your community looks like. Then section 3 is your capability identification. So what capabilities do you have within your jurisdiction? And these are really not necessarily response, like how many fire trucks and police cars and so on. It's really more, what kind of legal structure do you have, technical, fiscal, what kind of agreements do you have with other jurisdictions? What kind of resources do you have within your city to respond? 4 is the risk assessment. So we look at, we identify what risks there are, how often they occur, and then there's actually a sort of a mathematical calculation in determining how vulnerable you are. So you can take a tax assessed value and do some math and say, well, we're vulnerable to, say, 25% damage. So 25% of our tax assessed value is X. That's how much of damage we could expect under this type of disaster. Section 5 is really the meat of the plan, and that is the mitigation strategy. So these are the specific measures that we're going to undertake in the next 5 years to help mitigate risk in our community. Section 6 is infrastructure, and that's purely the city-owned infrastructure. So city property, from streets to parks to buildings, that type of thing. And then section 7 is really, how do we put this plan into motion? How do we actually make these things occur? So as I mentioned, this process from sort of a higher level is we conduct that HIVA, the hazard identification, vulnerability assessment, and we identify our community profile, our capabilities, our risks, and then we develop specific measures to help mitigate those. We can put all of this into our addendum to that county mitigation plan, And then each city's addendum goes separately, goes to the county, they review it, it goes to the state emergency management department, they approve it, and then it goes to FEMA Region 10, which is our region of FEMA. FEMA breaks down the country into 10 different regions. So ours is the West Coast, Alaska, Hawaii, and they approve it. And then after that, it's sort of a pre-approval, because then it comes back to you as the city council, our governing body, and you're the last, you're the approving authority, because it's our plan, it's our city. So you're the last step. And then from there, over the next 5 years, we will implement these measures and then reassess, do a new HIVA in 4 years as we build our plan for the 5th year, and see what hazards have changed and go back and go through this process. So at a more nuts and bolts street level, how we did this was myself and our emergency management coordinator, Christine Badger, participated in countywide work groups at DEM. So there were representatives from all the cities, and we worked together, kind of coached along by DEM on each section of the plan, and shared notes and strategies and so on. And then we worked, obviously this is our city addendum, so we worked with our city departments to write updated pieces of that, primarily public works engineering, O&M, IT and GIS, and the city clerk. Seems like a lifetime ago, but we actually came before the council in July of 2019 and sought your input at that point, as well as public input. This plan was actually supposed to be done at the end of 2019, or I'm sorry, at the beginning of 2020, go through the review, and then you were supposed to review it summer of last year, 2020. However, FEMA put a 1-year hold on all of these plans, obviously due to the pandemic. So it's kind of sat for a little bit. We also did a booth at the farmers market. We presented this at the Public Safety Advisory Committee meeting, and then we posted it on our social media accounts, seeking public input as well. Let's put the slide in here really quick. This is the hazard codes. I'm going to show you the chart on the specific hazard mitigation strategies that we identified for Lakewood. But you'll see for each strategy, they're designated to what they're addressing. And you'll see these letters. So A for avalanche, E for earthquake, and so on. So this is our matrix. This is just kind of a summary. All of these are explained more in detail in section 5. Each one of these is broken down a little bit more into what does it actually mean? What are we trying to accomplish with it? And then who's responsible for it? And a good example of the plan being updated is number 1 there, complete, distribute, and train on a multi-agency response to a transportation accident. So obviously in the last 5 years, we experienced a train derailment. We have high-speed trains coming through the city. They're going to restart here in this calendar year. And so, so when this plan was submitted, again, this was in 2019, or I'm sorry, early 2020. And so the timeline is just a bit off, but that still is one of our top priorities. Number 2, purchase and install generators at the road operations. In the last mitigation plan, we put in there and accomplished, completed the work to do the wiring for the building to accept a generator. So my understanding is they can pull up a generator now to the building and plug it in. But we hope to actually install generators full-time to the shops. Identify critical routes and determine alternate routes. And that's a task from the Public Works Engineering. A lot of it kind of similar to our snow routes and what we identify, but we want to put that into a formalized plan. And that's going to be more for debris removal. So you can see the EF and SW, that's for earthquakes, floods, and severe storms, windstorms. Radio communication setup between all city-owned vehicles, buildings, and the EOC. We've made some good progress on that. We want to increase that primarily in the public works arena, obviously police cars, all the radios. So making sure that the buildings and the EOC is now equipped with ham radios, multiple frequencies, as well as their police radios. Evacuation plan template for multiple events. Good example of that is the hazardous materials fire over on 104th and Steel the other day, well, a couple months ago. We don't have an actual written plan for how to do that, so we want to build a template for that. That was a fairly small incident where you only had to evacuate a small area and primarily sheltered in place. But if it was a larger event of something like that, we want a template to pull out and to be able to evacuate. Seismic review and retrofit of all bridges, culverts, and retaining walls within and through the city. So obviously some of these are, large tasks, take a lot of money, and take a lot of time. So that's kind of the purpose of the mitigation plan, is to look out, 5 years and see what do we want to accomplish. Battery backup for all major traffic signals. Again, it's a long-term project through Public Works. Complete, distributed, and trained staff on the continuity of operations planning. So that's ongoing. We're always bringing in new staff. And as I mentioned, we just updated the COOP. And then with that is training the employees and what their expectations are during a disaster, come into work and that sort of thing, and to be prepared and have the families prepared. We're also now doing a pandemic addendum to, or annex to, our COOP. So we're taking all of our lessons learned, all of our documents that we've created over this last year during the pandemic, and we'll attach that to our COOP so that we always have that. God forbid that we ever have to go through a pandemic again, but it could be adjusted to other things, but at least we'll capture, what the lessons that we've learned the hard way this year, and keep those on file. Essential records protection, again, just maintaining all of our government documents. And then some of this is planning, so capability identification and evaluation. So that's looking at what capabilities we have internally and adjusting our plans. Illicit discharge and spill response, Public Works engineering, develop mutual aid agreements with other public agencies to support in roadway clearing and repair. So understanding that if we have a large scale incident, or maybe it's a more localized incident, that we have agreements in place. We do with like law enforcement and fire districts do, but we want to push that into Public Works so that we can share those resources. Significant tree pruning and maintenance, that's ongoing through Public Works. They're continually doing that to mitigate, again, the damage from severe windstorms, which obviously we see quite often. Utility coordination, again, is ongoing through our emergency management program for almost all of the emergencies. Accurate mapping of all roadways, electronic and hard copy, that's our GIS section. And obviously we're, pretty well built out of Lakewood, but there's still changes. So that's ongoing. Traffic control devices for setting blockade, detour routes, and that's ongoing through this maintenance of the equipment that we have and replacing and upgrading things. The generator retrofit. In here, these are marked complete, and you may ask, why put those into this plan, but that's the way FEMA likes to see it, because they want to see what you've completed from the last plan and what you're building on from there for the next plan. So these were all part of our last plan, as I mentioned, getting the generator retrofits, getting the wiring into the Parks Operations Center, structural refit, did some internal framing to strengthen the building, creating emergency operations center in Lakewood City Hall. So again, that's something that's changed over the last 5 years, because we do that in the police department building now. And then our flood preparedness and response education and disaster preparedness training. So that's something that's ongoing that we continually work on. And then that is it. So I know I ran through that fast. I would be more than happy to take questions.
Questions for the Assistant Chief?
What's that? I'm sorry.
Mr. Branstetter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Chief, obviously there's a culmination of a good bit of work with a lot of ongoing items in the on the list there. I was just wondering, how does, when we approve this addendum, there were a number of items on your list that look like they're capital improvement type expenses, like the new generators for the parks and public works operations centers, the uninterrupted power supplies for street lights and things to do that. Are the individual departments responsible for then doing the work to get those into the CIP and get it in front of us to approve the costs for those?
Yes. And the kind of, which comes first, the cart and the horse, but the hazard mitigation plan, we create that in conjunction with the department heads of public works. So it's not a surprise to public works that, hey, we want you to put battery supply to the traffic signals. And then they can make that when it comes to, budget requests or potential grant opportunities. They sort of know what they need to work on in the next 5 years. And then vice versa, that can help us with grant opportunities because we have gone through this whole process, very careful, deliberate process to identify these risks and these mitigation strategies. And so when it comes to competing for grants or funding sources, we can use this as a basis for making that argument.
Okay, and you didn't specifically mention JBLM, and they don't seem to be a part of the county's plan. I didn't see them referenced as this plan, the county level plan covering them, or did I just miss that?
It gets a little tricky because they're a federal installation, and so they follow a little bit different rules and procedures. So to my knowledge, they don't do an addendum to this plan. They have their own emergency management program, and that all flows through the DoD, is my understanding, in the Department of Defense.
Okay, but in that regard, given that they're on the other side of a fence from us in some cases, did we identify any hazards that are on JBLM that we're concerned about spilling over into Lakewood? And did the plan address them in some way?
Yeah, it's an interesting point. They are really, because of their security restrictions, they again follow through DoD. If there's a disaster, they're not eligible for, say, FEMA funds. So they have their own funding and disaster preparedness through the DoD. So there isn't a lot of crosstalk on that. But that is a good point that I'll have to look into.
I'd be more interested is that they have some funds that would help us with some mitigation on our side of the fence.
Right.
Okay, but thanks a lot.
Thank you.
So, Chief, if I understand correctly, adoption of this plan is a prerequisite to being eligible for FEMA public assistance funding. Is that correct?
Correct.
Any other questions from council? Thank you very much. It's not exciting work, but it's pretty important when it happens. And I know Mr. Branstetter and I remember our seemingly hypothetical experience back at Emmitsburg when we were working on a train derailment. It didn't take too long for it to become real.
Right. Well, we hope to be prepared when they start running again.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Then we'll move to a review of the statement expressing a commitment to valuing diversity, equity, and inclusion. Says this is mine. Council had expressed an interest in making the statement its own, and had we had it sent out to council members. Unfortunately, I left my printed copy behind, but would ask to have council members raise your hand, and if you have suggestions for enhancements, substitutions, or improvements, share them with others so we can consider them. Ms. Moss. You're on mute, Mary.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. Under the statement, under the third point, according to historical inequities, I just wanted to know if we could add short and long-term, short range and long range multiple plannings. That was one of the suggestions. And then on this fourth bullet.
Up there so we get one straight before we move on.
Okay.
Under the third bullet point, is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
I think her comment.
Or we could just take the long range out and say.
That's my suggestion, is to take long range out, and then it just automatically talks about all types of municipal planning.
I think that would address it.
Okay.
You see, our official fly speck in the Pepper grammar guy, Mr. Whalen, nodding in agreement.
I think that would work. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then on the fourth bullet, where it says seeking and dismantling, could we just change that to say recognizing instead of seeking?
Thumbs up.
Yeah, I would recognizing or identifying.
Mm-hmm.
Recognizing might be, yeah.
Yeah, identifying might be stronger, actually.
Identifying? I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
That's good.
I didn't like seeking, so we use it identifying there. Ms. Kraus, are you being the official scrivener for changes here? Oh, Ms. Schumacher's
Yeah.
lit up. Okay, got it.
Okay. And then on these international practices will be informed. I was looking at, in that paragraph there, I was looking at our objective is to invite all Lakewood organizations and individual citizens to partner with the city in this commitment to equity and inclusion and partake in the opportunities.
I only have one question on that. I would like it if we could start using the word residents versus citizens. I think residents is more inclusive of the community, and it's just the term that we should be using, frankly. So that would be my only suggestion with that.
I don't have a problem with that.
I like that.
Okay. And
So we should
then,
probably, just to be consistent, just going up above on protecting justice and equality for all citizens, that should be residents, right?
Yeah.
I think so. I would like to see that in more of the communication. I think it should be replaced altogether, not just here.
Well, technically, it's supposed to be residents.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
okay, I don't have a problem with that. And let's see.
Well, while we're there, for some reason, I just don't like partake. Sounds like we're eating. Maybe if we could come up with a substitute for that.
Inclusion.
Well, the word partake.
Oh,
I think our objective there is a little broader too. Instead of just, I think our objective is to provide access to all opportunities for the residents of Lakewood and invite them to take advantage of those opportunities. We can't, it's kind of a lead a horse to water kind of thing. First, you have to have access. And then they should be encouraged to use that access. We can't make them. But I think it's a little stronger if we talk about making sure that everyone has access.
Mm-hmm. How about this, Don? Could we say that our objective is to create a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive Lakewood community for all residents? That really is our objective, isn't it?
I'm not sure that, maybe I'm speaking for Mary, but I think what she was trying to do there was to say that we're all going to work on, we invite everybody to help us with this. This isn't just the city council saying we're going to make this a diverse, equitable, and inclusive community.
No, good point.
Because you mentioned organizations and the individuals, correct? So that's why you're trying to be all inclusive that way.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm a little concerned about access. I mean, it's one thing to say, here it is, come get it, when the whole idea is that there are not equal pathways to the thing that we're offering. So.
Are we good with that? The other one I was just going to suggest is to add that the city council will partner with the Clover Park School District to ensure that equity and opportunities prevail in all deliveries of educational policies, services, and practices. That was just a thought. And the reason that came up was because I feel like as a body, we need to show that we are supporting the school district as well, in particular, because a lot of our work is with students.
Mm-hmm.
That was the suggestion that I had. And that's all I had on that, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Anyone else?
Mike, you're muted.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Bulkey.
a couple of comments. The one about the school one is, I do, since we don't have any policy control over the school district, I do worry about making that comment. And in fact, and I think this is a promise we can't keep, and it makes it look like we're joined at the hip, and we're not.
Maybe we can have something that we will pursue any opportunities to assist and enhance efforts of the Clover Park School District, which facilitate the accomplishment of these objectives, or something along that line.
Wouldn't they be included in the invite all Lakewood organizations and individual residents? Isn't that inclusive of the school district there? I mean, you could change it, whereas invite all Lakewood organizations, businesses. I mean, you could put the wording in there to be inclusive.
Yeah. I think that I would be most supportive of the generic of indicating our intent to work with leaders in the community, throughout the community, without particularly having to spell out the school district or anything else, because I think there are leaders in the, there's certainly the school board, but there are also leaders in service clubs and leaders in the religious community and others. And I think that our intention is to be a willing partner with the leaders throughout the community to address matters of equity.
I have no objection to that.
I like it as well.
So I have, when we get to the last sentence, which is sometimes the second thing that people read after the first sentence, maybe it's just me and my grammar deficiencies, but the first sentence seems clumsy. If I was actually to say that to someone, I'd say, these practices are to the benefit of all at the expense of no one.
I would prefer we take out that entire last line.
I agree. I agree.
I'm not sure it adds value.
Or simplify the last line and just say, we are better together. You know, it's kind of a slogan we've used and bantered around. It simplifies it, but.
It's actually the school district slogan.
Was that theirs?
Yeah. Ron might take offense.
Is it?
So if we take it out, I would then suggest that this city council partnering with the police department should be before the previous paragraph.
I agree with that.
Which is more important and broader, because privacy and recency don't add with, and we're going to go after hate crimes.
What does that sentence, shall partner with the Lakewood Police Department to uncover and prosecute acts of hate? I don't know of any other thing where we agree as a body to uncover crime. I feel like I'm getting a responsibility that isn't ours.
Yeah.
I think we should wordsmith that. I mean, I'm all for prosecuting hate crimes, and clearly in a community like ours, it's important everywhere, but clearly in a community like ours, it's very important. But I shall partner with, it makes it sound like we've got some call on it. I've never been asked to be involved by the police or by anybody to, in fact, we go out of our way to not be involved in investigations, right? Or are other members on this body involved in investigations of crime?
We were going to talk to you about that later, Paul.
I know Jason, that lawyer thing, but
I do think that sentence about partnering with the police department to uncover and prosecute acts of hate is unnecessary. That it's covered jointly by the previous paragraph, which is a good concluding paragraph to the statement. Okay. But it's also covered under our practice of protecting justice and equality for all residents. Because our role in that is making sure that the police department has both resources and policy guidance to be able to do that. But we don't directly partner operationally with them. So I really think that's covered under the last practice bullet up above, and would take it out. And I like that on the draft, that is the third from the end, it is especially unpleasant paragraph as a concluding paragraph to the statement.
I'd agree with
and
that.
Okay.
Mr. Bulkey.
Yeah, I would note, I since I've been on the council, I've never gotten any information on hate crimes. So we might want to start with at least counting them or at least tracking them, because I don't think I've ever received any information in this body, in this position, on hate crimes. So I think we need to understand that. And so we do need to need to at least know the extent of what's going on. So, but I agree with Mike on that. But when it comes to material things that we can do, one of the first things we might want to ask is getting reporting.
So if we want to put something in regarding hate crimes, I think it should be something along the line, but instead of partnering, expressing policy, which is our job.
Right.
It shall be the policy of the Lakewood Police Department to be vigilant in its obligation to investigate and prosecute acts of hate.
Yeah, good. I like that.
I'm going to write in what Don said.
I don't know that in this document that is not that's the right statement to make, because this is a statement about what we're going to do as a council, our practices and our beliefs. I think that
it's our policy though, Mike.
Well, this isn't a policy creating document in that it's not an ordinance or a resolution or something that's binding to do that. I think when we meet next month and we talk about, as Mr. Boki indicates, we need to think, what are some of the actions that we want to have done and that we want and in terms of goals, objectives, and that we want to activate the city manager to work on with all of the departments of the city. I think that in that particular forum, in terms of next steps, that falls through here. I just don't know that it is that adding a directive to the police department into this particular document is the right tone.
Could you say something in that last bullet statement that everyone seems to like, where it starts at especially in Pleasant, and get down to the sentence, hate based upon race, creed, ancestry, blah, 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 is unwelcomed and is unacceptable in Lakewood, and will be prosecuted in Lakewood? You could say that.
Well, I'm concerned there that it limits it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people can hate and be prejudiced and not be committing a crime. You can act bad without being criminally liable. I wouldn't want to just limit that to being criminally liable.
Right. It's not actionable to be boorish. I get that. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'd like it to be totally socially unacceptable.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go farther and it's a crime, that's a different thing.
Mm-hmm.
Can you read what you wrote again, Mr. Mayor?
That it shall be the policy of the Lakewood Police Department to be vigilant in its obligation to investigate and prosecute acts of hate.
Acts of hate. Okay. Because there's a crime under 9A in the state statute, isn't there?
Yeah. I think it's an enhancement.
Mm-hmm.
But I haven't done criminal law for about 40 years.
Yeah. I'd feel more comfortable if we say crimes of hate as opposed to acts
Yeah.
of hate, because there might
Yeah,
be
I
a difference.
I think that's more appropriate.
Yeah. Crimes of hate. I had just a couple of questions for the body, not necessarily suggested changes, but if you go up to the bullets where we commit following practices, accounting for historical inequity in long-range municipal planning. If someone were to come up off the street and say, gee, I saw your statement, and what were you thinking when you were discussing historical inequity in Lakewood's long-range municipal planning over the last 25 years since you've been a city? I'd say, I don't know. Would it be better to say accounting for inequity in long-range municipal planning as opposed to historical? I just don't know what Lakewood's historical inequity has been, to be honest, in 25 years of cityhood. And then the other one that I had a question about would be.
Can we talk about that one first?
Sure, yeah. I'm just raising the question because I know that some of us will be asked, and I'm gonna, we all want to say that we stand firm in addressing historical inequities, but I don't know if I could tell you with certainty what they may have been here in Lakewood. And this is a Lakewood statement.
Right.
Okay.
For example, the city of Tacoma has an equity index where they've actually gone out and looked at all of the factors in their different communities and overlaid crime stats and economic stats and graduation rates and all that sort of thing. And so they can see those things. And we haven't done that work yet.
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing we've got them.
Well, but does it relate to planning?
Right, that was my thought, and it's just.
So in long
It
standing.
absolutely relates to planning, where you put your parks, where you put your roads, where you put your art.
And here, for example, in Lakewood, the most affluent areas haven't received parks money, streetlights, first sidewalks. It's been a conscious effort to focus it on the census tracts that are CDBG eligible by their demographic information. So, but there are a lot of inequities in cities who've been around a longer period of time that were very intentional. And those, I think, infect us.
Mm-hmm.
It carries over into generational home ownership, for example.
Yeah.
And so the people in Lakewood may be disadvantaged by historical inequities in municipal planning that occurred in other jurisdictions. And I think we need to account for that in our allocation of resources. But it isn't that we change our planning policies. It's that we know that factors existed which disadvantage certain groups.
So I really like where you're going with that. What if we took out the word municipal? Because there are historical inequities that happened before we became a city.
Mm-hmm.
Not municipal planning, it's county planning.
Let me jump in because I'm not sure I understand. I understand what Jason's saying because that's the way I read it when I first read it today. Because I thought, well, historical inequity. So what are we? I read it as, hey, when we became a city, did we redline or did we do something? But then after Mary made that change, accounting for historical inequity in short and long range municipal planning, I see it as a future going forward document now. Now I feel like we have to account for that as we do that change. It's just that I flipped on it because when I read it, I go, well, then we're accusing somebody of redlining, or we're accusing our planners of in past city councils of doing some things. And I don't agree with all the zoning that we've done, as you well know, but I see it as in future, and I think that that's an important part. So am I reading it wrong?
Or could you say accounting for and addressing inequity in long range planning, or in long range municipal planning, or in municipal planning? accounting for and addressing inequity as opposed to historical. We don't know.
As the mayor has said, I hope that we've been working on that. And I think the commitment of CDBG dollars over a long period of time in communities, clearly we have a lot of CDBL. I think the majority of the city is eligible though. So it's almost
Well, one way to look at it is that it's both look at what we've done, but speak to what we're going to do. It is, we could say, rather than focusing on inequities, saying that ensure equity in municipal planning and rectify historical inequities. That gets us into saying what we're going to do, and it speaks to a practice where we're going to essentially use that equity lens in our municipal planning going forward. And we're going to just look at, is there something that we have to address that's happened in the past? I don't have exact wording for that, but that's kind of the message that I think where we talk about a practice. I certainly just don't want to leave it with accounting for historical equity by saying, yep, it's there.
That's the action word, yeah.
And it was those guys 40 years ago at the county that did it.
Yeah.
That's accounting for it, but it doesn't address it. And our biggest role is as we move forward with municipal planning to make sure that we're not creating any inequities.
I agree with Mike. While we were talking about that, what I'd written down was to scratch the whole thing and put ensure equity in municipal planning. Accounting for historical equity can be somebody from outside saying, we recognize bad. Well, what are you going to do about it? Ensure equity in municipal planning is what you're going to do about it.
I like that.
And that's inclusive of addressing historical inequities on the road to ensuring equity. I like it.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah. You adjust plans, you adjust for the historical inequities.
Can I ask a similar question as you go to the first sentence after the bullet points? After the critical role that city leaders have, the next sentence says, we recognize that systemic inequality has endured, but commit that it shall not pervade. I'm generally okay with that, but I bristle a little bit about, do we really recognize that systemic inequality has endured in Lakewood when we haven't named it or claimed it? I would prefer to say we recognize that inequality has endured. I don't know if it's systemic to Lakewood. And again, I'm speaking as a white male. I get it, and there may be others in the community that would tell me I'm completely all wet, which I would accept. But I don't know how to answer that question.
I think with what's happening in our world today, the synthetic is necessary.
Systemic, you believe is necessary?
Systemic, yes.
Yes, I agree.
Agree.
Well, like I said, people who know more than I, the three of you,
And
I take it.
That there is there are some folks that feel very strongly that there are some systemic inequities that are impacting them in some of our groups.
Sure.
And for some, there's just the perception of inequities, which is, when we deal as a city with our historical perceptions that endure, that we constantly have to work to try to set right.
Right.
So I'm fine with the way that that with the sentence as it is, you know, and committing that it shall not pervade commits us to action when we can actually document an actionable inequity. And that's the other problem of not all inequity is actionable.
Right. Okay, well, I appreciate the conversation. I think it's good.
Before we move on, can we talk about pervade? Is there a more commonly used term? I had to look it up, and I'm a word person. I suggest persist. That's still a pretty highfalutin word, but
Persist is better than pervade.
Persist, you said?
Pervade is, I mean, Simpson would have loved pervade. It's a very artsy sort of word.
Wouldn't he?
Well, it's the same number of letters, so it doesn't take up any more space on the page.
There you go. Starts with P.
Pervade in my mind tells me pervasive and kind of in everything.
Yeah, it's more insidious.
And I don't know that's true, but persistent probably is a better, because it's always there, right? That in my mind, that's persistent. Don't look for me for another word because I don't have that huge vocabulary that the rest of you have. But
I think, for lack of a better term, I think we need to dumb it down a little. I mean, as far as the vocabulary goes.
Do we have enough to make?
Thank you.
Redraft, it sounds like then?
I have a few suggestions.
You bet.
So I'd like to start with the title, A Rising Tide Lifts All Boats. I have trouble with that because it doesn't in this case. And I suggest we take it out.
it's very supply side economics, though, Linda. Very Reagan-esque.
Very
in its
Reagan.
approach. So for some of us, you know,
It is
who were
an
in
odd
college
title.
when they were talking about supply side economics.
Well, it is an odd title for this kind of statement, frankly.
Why is it there?
It is, and I made
I
a
don't know.
comment about how the statement spoke more to equality versus equity.
Yeah.
And I think our statement is about equity, and that's what we're going for. So I just thought that there is, because there's a slight but important difference, and it says up there, rising tide lifts all boats. When opportunity is fair and equal, the entire community benefits. So the fair and equal part speaks more to equality than equity. And, you know, equality has something to do with giving everyone the same exact resources, where equity involves distributing the resources based on the recipient. So I do have some pause, like Linda, about with the title, which then ties into that first statement.
So taking out that first statement as well.
So would you just say a statement on equity by the Lakewood City Council? That's your title.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Simple.
And then you would delete a rising tide lifts all boats in that next. Would you keep then when opportunity is fair and equal, the entire community benefits, or you don't want that, Patty?
I would suggest not.
I agree.
So you start with the Lakewood City Council acknowledges.
Correct.
Okay.
That would be my recommendation.
Mine too.
Okay.
My other suggestion is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bullets down. Increasing sensitivity out to different norms and cultural expectations. To me, the word different automatically sets it up to be different from what? Different from the dominant culture, perhaps. And so that's a huge issue for me. Perhaps I'm the only one reading it that way, but I would suggest we take out the word different and maybe substitute in the word social, which goes with norms, and say increasing sensitivity to social norms and cultural expectations so that they can live on their own without comparison to the any
Okay.
other.
Oh, okay.
Social norms and cultural expectations.
I like that.
The social norms goes broader.
Versus a different.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
I was wondering, with this sentence, these intentional practices will inform our decision-making on policing, zoning, capital investment. How would the body feel about adding the words environmental preservation? Environmental preservation. So it would be policing, zoning, capital investment, environmental preservation, and all other matters of the, and then I would add the word the city council. The reason I suggest environmental preservation is that it,
Okay.
environmental justice is tied into racial inequities, and the city council typically talks about things like policing and parks and economic development, but we don't overly talk about the environment too much, and it fits. I'm okay one way or the other, but I thought I would throw it out there.
Say it again, environmental
Preservation.
preservation.
I would rather not add that, because it clutters up the sentence that is clear to me now.
Can we add the word the in front of city council?
Yes.
Okay, I'm cool with that. Thank you. My last question then is about the words especially unpleasant. People are dying, they're getting stoned, they're getting mutilated, and the words especially unpleasant really rub me the wrong way.
It also reminds you of like how someone had a bad day.
Yeah.
So yeah.
I don't know that I have the exact right word. Unconscionable is something that sticks in there. I'm open to another word.
Firm. Yeah,
Yeah,
something very
yeah.
strong.
It is unconscionable that some
Yeah.
members of our community are. Mhm.
That
As opposed to consider, because that's a little like sitting back in my ivory white tower thinking about
Considering the hate
yeah,
that's
considering,
going on.
right?
Mhm.
That's not good. Yeah.
What line was that?
That's
The
in the
unpleasant line.
especially unpleasant.
Oh, it is especially.
It's now our
And
last
you're,
paragraph.
oh, okay. And you want to change it to,
It is unconscionable that some members of
Yeah.
our community are victims of acts.
I like that.
yeah, great.
I like that.
Okay. I took notes, Brianna. I'll send you my edits.
What about the word unwelcome? Do you like that, Linda, as opposed to unacceptable?
I do actually like unwelcome, and it goes back to something that the mayor said earlier about, you know, it's not wanted here. Socially unacceptable, I believe, was the words
Okay.
used. And I'm okay with unacceptable as well, but
Well, you know, unwelcome is a word that you hear a lot through our police department. They talk about the way they train and talk to the people that they arrest or whatever. They tell them about this is unwelcome and unacceptable in Lakewood. So that may be something to tie into that.
that's a good point.
You know, it appears that you're talking about a limited number of, in that sense, especially unpleasant starts, a limited number of identified acts that you're passing judgment on. And maybe it should say something more like, it is unconscionable that members of our community can fall victim to acts of deliberate violence.
Deliberate or violence based on race, blah, 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 blah.
Based
blah.
upon, yeah.
I'm good with that.
I would take the word can out and say it's unconscionable that members of our community fall victim.
Members. Community.
Mm-hmm. Fall victim to acts of.
Uh-oh.
Okay.
Well, I think we did some good work.
So
I think we're at a point where Brianna can share what she thinks we've said, perhaps with the deputy mayor and one other council member, and because they did really good work when we were trying to come up with interview questions, and then can with the city clerk format the version that'll be on the agenda next week.
then we come back with it as a resolution.
I think it maybe is more of a motion to approve the statement.
Yes,
Because it says statement.
and I'm happy to serve.
I think a motion.
But we say a statement on equity by the Lakewood City Council.
Yeah. Just that simple a title.
Yeah.
Look, I have to go back to the parliamentarian. I'm thinking maybe it's more appropriate as a resolution because we act through ordinances and resolutions. It's not a proclamation, which is a nicety. But
How did we do the Tacoma ceasefire one?
It's a resolution.
Yeah.
Yeah, a resolution has more force.
yeah,
Not an ordinance, but it's a resolution.
Mhm.
it's a statement of policy.
Mm-hmm. So I would be happy, but I think it would be, most appropriate for Linda and Patty to maybe lead it. I'm happy to sit and work with them. So the three of us could do a subcommittee if you'd like, Mayor.
Yeah, why don't you three of you do a subcommittee, Brianna, send it out to your recollection of what we thought we said out to us, corrected for obvious errors, and make sure we don't all respond all, so we all get to see it, and then the committee can send it to back to the clerk for inclusion in the agenda.
Are we okay with the city council offers the final commitment, the intolerance of intolerance? That one is just above, it is especially unconscionable.
Italicized phrase.
Yeah.
Or the Lakewood City Council will not tolerate intolerance.
I think it's more direct.
Yeah.
Got that, Brianna? That's my best prose. The City Council will not tolerate intolerance.
Nice. We did some good wordsmithing here today. John would be proud.
Yeah, send it
Without
down
the benefit of snacks.
Well, that's our own fault this time because we have the person with the snacks on board.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, she would have brought him.
And here we are in Zoom land.
Yes.
Who has snacks?
I would have invited all of you to visit me last week in a much sunnier clime. We could have done some great wordsmithing there, but
I
We
think
were glad that you were back home so we didn't have to have that rubbed in anymore.
Oh,
yeah,
I think I'm gonna.
No, you seemed very distracted.
yeah, it was a bad night.
I think I'm gonna set up on the lanai next Monday night with the ocean in the background.
Yeah,
It's not gonna be a virtual one.
exactly.
No.
I wanted to redo a certain game that was happening at the same time.
Oh. Yeah, it's you put salve on your wounds there.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, so we can move on from that and go to reports by the Assistant City Manager, Ms. Krause.
I only have 2 items to report. This weekend, we have the Lakewood Spring Community Cleanup. This is occurring in partnership with Waste Connections. This annual event is scheduled for Saturday, April 17th, between 8 a.m. and 2 p.m., and also on Sunday, the 18th, from 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. The location of the event is the Lakewood Transfer Station at 3869 94th Street Southwest. We're still in need of volunteers. If you're interested, please contact our city clerk, Brianna Schumacher, sorry. And then we also have on April 20th and April 21st, we have the Washington State Transportation Commission meeting. This is a virtual event hosted by the city of Lakewood. On April 20th, it occurs between 1 and 5 p.m. And on April 21st, the meeting is between 9 a.m. and 12:30. And that is all that I have.
Any questions for Ms. Krause?
Yes, my question based on her brevity is, can she do this more often?
Second that.
And that, you got a thumbs up from Ms. Walker, and that's the first time I've seen lawyers concur on brevity in a long time. So go to council comments, Ms. Moss.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did attend the school board meeting this afternoon, and I just gave an update on the transportation works that's going on. Talked a little bit about our government relations and the support that we get from our legislators, and I gave them an update on our summer events. So I had no questions. The only question I had was on the connectivity road. They wanted to know if that was going to include telecom, and it's coming right through that area there. So everything was good.
Thanks.
That's all I have.
Mr. Branstetter.
Mr. Mayor, I have only one thing to look at as I am thinking back to our last meeting. Mr. Guerrero's presentation to us being inside the public hearing didn't really allow for a lot of clarifying questions on parking, and I really don't have a good, clear understanding of the Planning Commission's view of why they recommended some changes to the plan. And I'm going to send an email to the city manager asking about that. And I also going to ask him to get us some more information to clarify the issue that the gentleman whose father is the primary developer who's been assembling parcels to actually do some changes in that neighborhood and why he felt that we were at cross purposes with some things in the draft. And there are a couple of other questions that I'd have. So I don't know that we're, how far we'll get at being able to address them to actually be able to adopt a sub-area plan next week. I go think back to the downtown plan. We pushed that out till we were sure that we knew what we were getting. I think we need to do the same diligence with this plan, but it's on the agenda for next week so that we can at least talk about it and see where we are. And I'll gonna push my thoughts through the city manager so that he can get back to all of us where there are some things that are just not clear in my reading of it. That's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
just know when you do that, maybe you could incorporate something regarding that property aggregation issue. My understanding of the testimony individual was that they wanted to put as many inexpensive apartments as they possibly could in that space. And we're looking for transit-oriented development concessions essentially to do that, where the sub-area plan provides for some certainty and I would call it an easier path to permits if you follow certain criteria like so much open space per unit, et cetera. And if you follow those, they would get fewer units. I'd like a clarification on that. If there's been some dialogue between the folks and they can go through the normal process and get more units under the current zoning, and they could under the, or I would call it the short-term process, and that's their issue. That's a lot different to me than if it's changing what they can do.
Yeah, it seems that there was the current wording of the plan expresses a strong preference and an easier way to comply with some of the requirements if you build townhomes instead of traditional apartments, even if that's going to result in a lower density. I don't know. I'll phrase the questions, and I'm probably going to send the city manager a sequence of emails to sort of separate it into several topics, and then hopefully we'll get some staff feedback or a basis for what it is we want to look at more closely in the draft plan.
Right. Ms. Farmer.
I need to coordinate with our deputy mayor on our Thursday Pierce County Regional Council meeting. I have an engagement that just came up, and so I'm hoping he will be there.
This Thursday, correct?
Yes, at 6. And then I am scheduled to volunteer for the spring cleanup, and then realized that I volunteered before I set my second COVID vaccine shot. And so I'm hoping that I will not have any reactions, but if I do, I will be contacting Brianna at the last second. So y'all need to help me out here and sign up to volunteer. That's all I have this week.
I can do Thursday for you and cover PCRC. No problem.
All right, Ms. Bell.
Thank you, Mayor. I am signed up, so I will be at the spring cleaning event on Saturday morning, bright and early. So that should be fun. And then I attended the Lake City neighborhood meeting, and a council member, Brandstatter, was also there. So that was great. In case there were questions and things like that that maybe I didn't know. It was wonderful to meet that great community, that great neighborhood. I look forward to learning more about what they do. They're very involved. They're excited to get back in person if that ever does happen. So it was really nice. Oh, and I also called in on the 25th anniversary meeting for the city, just to hear all the wonderful things that they're planning. The new communications manager was on the call, so that was nice. He had a lot of things that he wanted to get going and incorporate. So I'm excited even just to see what's going to keep going with that. That's it for me.
Mr. Polkey.
Thank you, Mayor. I might be the alternate to PCRC, so if there's votes involved, then I think I still get the, am I the alternate? I think I am.
I think so, and you do. Lakewood gets 2 votes, so yeah.
If you have any votes going on, I can make it. Went to the Planning Commission meeting April 7th. So that was last Wednesday night. They got a presentation from the Clover Creek Council about the health of the creek, which you know, Jblm has done a lot of work to the tune of millions and millions of dollars of putting in a new, this huge culvert thing that hopefully will help with water flow and the health of the creek. And the discussion kind of meandered. They also talked about WAHOP and some various things like that. It was an interesting presentation. Then Paul Busich talked about the flood zone in that area of town in Springbrook and what they were doing in regards to that, which is I guess they're still studying it. And then they did talk a little bit about the liquid station thing, but I don't really have any notes on that. So got my shot, but I got mine at CMAR right here in Lakewood on Bridgeport there. One shot, the J&J, went very well, very smoothly. And it looks like they are, I don't know if they're going every day like that, but I went in there one afternoon and the gal said, come back tomorrow. And I came back tomorrow and went right in. So there is availability and I'm hoping everyone gets vaccinated. Of course, everyone got the news that we're taking a step back here in the county. So hopefully it won't be for long.
Thanks, Mr. Whalen.
Well, as Ms. Farmer indicated, we have PCRC this Thursday, which I will be attending. On Friday, we have the walkthrough, I believe, with members of the Arts Commission, and that's Thursday, excuse me. Thursday morning, there'll be the preview for the 6 selected artists out there at the Colonial Plaza. So that will become an interesting time. I plan to show up for that and just kind of observe. And then earlier today, the first of my, what are we going on, 9:42. I started at 4 with Zoom meetings. It was the Pierce Transit Commission meeting at 4, and it was quite a lengthy discussion about fare box recovery. I think the policy, as the mayor knows, is roughly around 20% of revenues are recovered at the fare box, and they're looking to maybe increase that by increasing the rates for adult and shuttle fares. More to follow on that, but they're looking at a rate increase there and potentially putting the ballot, as I mentioned last time, the 0.3% for ensuring increased service hours and better availability throughout the county service areas. So more to follow. If you have any thoughts on that, I will forward the information and would love to take feedback back to the commission next month. And I missed you for the last week. I mean, from the bottom of my heart, the real bottom, Mary, I missed you all.
It sounded good, Jason.
Well, 2 events this afternoon or early evening, I did a short video to congratulate the city of Gimhae on its 40th anniversary, which is interesting because as a community, they go back 2,000 years. So it's kind of one of those things and kind of analogous to our own situation where people have been here for a long, long time, but the city hasn't. Coffee with the Mayor tomorrow morning. We'll have Vince Dodsworth giving, and maybe Ms. Martinez, giving an update of the 25th anniversary events. There will be bling. Something of, it just came up, Mr. Bulkey's comment that I'd like to comment on seriously is Pierce County moving back to phase 2 COVID. And I'm deeply concerned over that, this regression and its impact on business and the quality of life in Pierce County in general, Lakewood in particular. And I'm not only concerned about the troublesome metrics which indicate the disease is still with us, but for the lack of transparency at both at the state level, both at the governor's office and at the State Department of Health, the lack of credible information and explanation as to the degree of disparity. 2 facts stand out in this regard. One, the death rate in Pierce County continues to go down. And death rate is really the only consistent objective criteria that exists. Hospitals' practices vary, the data collection by the state, the software that's used, the reporting by county health departments, all these things are in a state of flux. The death rate is a very objective criteria, and our death rate continues to go down. Second is perhaps even more troubling because it's discretionary, is that the vaccine delivered to Pierce County is way below its per capita percentage allocation to the tune of tens of thousands of doses. And while Seattle at the same time has received a much larger percentage than its population should be allocated pro rata. The one person I know refers to the explanation that there was a glitch in the system to the bureaucratic explanation that the dog ate my homework. Somebody isn't being forthright. Either it wasn't ordered or it wasn't allocated properly. They've spent millions of dollars on the metrics surrounding COVID out of the CARES money at the state level. And to say that there's a glitch, sorry you didn't get your vaccine, just doesn't cut it. And I think the citizens of Pierce County need to demand of the governor and the state health department that we get every available vaccine to which we're entitled on a pro rata basis. And this is a significant factor when you're talking about rolling back the economy of a county based on subjective metrics, when the most objective metric is going in the right direction, and the vaccine that will help immunize the county from these problems is not being properly allocated. We've seen it happen with transportation money. We've seen it happen with virtually every other type of allocation that the people with the votes and the influence get in line first. And I don't think it's entirely an accident that Pierce County's got the short end of the stick. So I think we need to collectively demand that we get all our vaccine and keep making noise until it happens. So that's my rant for the night. But I'm never running for anything again, so I can say things like that. Anything else to come before the council?
That's it.
If not, thank you for being here. See you next Monday.
All right,
Thank
take
you.
care.
Everybody.
Good.
Hi, guys.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.